My daughter didn't cry often. But that night she looked me in the eyes and whispered, "Dad, you need to leave her, please." Before I explain how my 13-year-old begged me to leave her mother, drop a comment with your state or country and hit subscribe if you believe kids see more than we think. The kitchen smelled like rosemary. A pot of chicken soup simmered on the stove, the broth bubbling soft under a low flame. Outside, wind tapped against the window as if trying to get in. It was October in Boone, the kind of evening that made the leaves rattle and the air feel older than it should. I stood at the counter cutting the last bit of celery. The dull scrape of the knife against the board was the only sound aside from the hum of the fridge. "Josie," I called out, "dinner's ready." No answer. I turned off the stove and listened for her footsteps. Still nothing. I walked to the hallway and called again, softer this time. She came down slowly, too slowly, shoulders hunched, hands buried in the sleeves of her sweater. She sat across from me at the table, eyes lowered, fingers brushing the edge of her spoon. Her soup barely steamed. She didn't touch it. "You feeling okay?" I asked. She nodded, but it was the kind of nod that meant the opposite. She was pale. There were faint shadows under her eyes, the kind that show up when a kid hasn't been sleeping right. I tried again. "School all right today? Anything happen?" She shrugged. "It's fine." The silence between us thickened. I watched her swirl the soup with the spoon, not lifting it to her mouth. She looked like she was somewhere else entirely. I reached for my own bowl, trying not to push, but then, without looking at me, she said it. "She brought someone here last Tuesday." The words landed like a pebble in still water. I froze. "When you were sleeping," she added, barely audible. My hand stayed midair, the spoon halfway between bowl and mouth. "Who did?" She looked up then. Her eyes were red, not from crying now, from something older, heavier. "Mom," she said. I put the spoon down, very carefully. "They were in the kitchen," she went on. She was laughing. I was in my room, but I heard everything. The hum of the fridge filled the silence again. Josie's voice trembled as she added, "She said, it'd be easier if you just disappeared." I didn't speak. Not because I didn't believe her, but because a part of me already knew. There had been signs. Monica's long work trips. Her phone calls taken in the garage. The perfume that lingered in our car, not hers. But hearing it from Josie, that made it real in a way nothing else had. I looked at her, really looked at her. My daughter. 13. Too young to carry that kind of knowledge. She bit her lips, still fiddling with the spoon. And then, in the softest voice I've ever heard, she said, "Dad, I think she wants to hurt you." I didn't know what scared me more, the words themselves, or the way Josie said them. So quiet. So certain. "I think she wants to hurt you." I leaned back in my chair like my body needed distance from the truth. Josie didn't move. Her eyes stayed on mine, pleading, but steady. No child should ever have to say something like that. "How long have you felt this way?" I asked. She took a moment. Then she used to whisper on the phone. "I thought it was just private work stuff, but lately," she hesitated, "she forgets I'm around, or maybe she doesn't care." The kitchen walls felt like they were closing in. The soft tap of the wind on the window suddenly sounded sharper. The light above us flickered just once. Not enough to be a power issue. Just enough to feel like a warning. I reached out and touched Josie's wrist gently. "Sweetheart, you did the right thing telling me. I believe you." She looked down. Her fingers were ice cold. She left her phone unlocked once, she said. "I saw messages. I didn't read much, just a name. And a sentence I can't stop thinking about. I didn't push. But she told me anyway. It said, 'He's too stupid to notice.' But not for long." My breath caught. She deleted it as soon as she came in the room. Pretended nothing happened. I nodded slowly, trying to stay calm for her. My wife Monica had been gone 2 nights on what she called a strategy offsite in Charlotte. Her company did this every quarter. At least that's what I'd been told. It was one of those things I never questioned. Until now. I glanced at the fridge behind Josie. Taped to it was Monica's usual meal plan, her neat handwriting, all caps color-coded. Monday pasta, Tuesday leftover roast, Wednesday soup. She was always prepared, always in control. But Tuesday night, the night Josie mentioned I had taken NyQuil, I remembered being groggy, heavy, falling asleep with the television still on. What kind of mother? What kind of wife? I pushed the thought away. This wasn't the moment to spiral. Did she know you hurt her? I asked gently. Josie shook her head. I was quiet. But I don't think she cared even if she did. That did something to me. Not rage. Not even heartbreak. Just a slow, dull collapse inside. I don't want to live here if you're not here, she said. It wasn't a plea, it was a decision. I looked at my daughter, my only child, and saw for the first time how much she had been holding in. The silence at dinner. The bags under her eyes. The tight way she held herself when Monica was home. All of it, a language I hadn't understood until now. I walked Josie upstairs that night. She didn't ask to sleep in my room. But when I kissed her goodnight, she gripped my hand just a second too long. I lingered by the door. She looked so small under the covers, so tired. You'll stay close, right? She whispered. I promise, I said. She nodded once, then turned her face to the wall. Back downstairs, I stood in the kitchen. Didn't turn on any more lights. Just stood there letting the dim refrigerator glow cast long shadows across the floor. There was still soup in the pot. Still 2 bowls on the table. Still one life I didn't recognize anymore. I rinsed the dishes. Slowly. Not because I cared, but because the sound of water helped me think. The sentence Josie read kept echoing. He's too stupid to notice. Maybe I had been. Maybe comfort is just a kind of blindness. I opened Monica's drawer, the one she thought I never used. Inside, neat folders. Labeled with old bills, school files, car insurance. But tucked beneath them, I found something new. A receipt. From a hotel in Asheville. Last Tuesday. Not Charlotte, not strategy offsite. I read it twice, then folded it once and slipped it in my back pocket. Didn't even feel surprised. I walked over to the kitchen window. The wind outside had picked up. Leaves dancing across the porch light like restless shadows. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, not because of time, but because of knowing. 15 years of marriage. And I couldn't name the last time I felt safe sleeping beside her. The phone buzzed behind me. I turned. A message on the screen. Monica's name, love you. Heading back in the morning. That's all it said, no emoji. No heart, no warmth. Just notification. I didn't reply. I didn't even touch the phone. Instead, I walked back upstairs. Past Josie's room. Past the family photos. Past the painting she made in 3rd grade, the one Monica said wasn't frame-worthy, but I framed anyway. I stood at the door to our bedroom. The one Monica and I shared. And I thought, what if Josie was right? What if this was never going to be just a betrayal, but something worse? That night I looked at my daughter and for the first time in 15 years of marriage, I wasn't sure if I'd wake up safe tomorrow. If someone you loved turned into a stranger, would you pretend not to see it or would you start digging? Tell me below. I'll be reading. She kissed my cheek like she always did, but this time I flinched. It was automatic. Like my body had figured it out before my mind was ready to catch up. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and pretended not to. Monica was good at pretending. She pulled her suitcase through the front door, set it by the stairs. Her smile was polite. Too polite. How was the trip? I asked. She shrugged off her coat. Long. That client doesn't know when to stop talking. I nodded. Didn't say much more. Didn't want to tip my hand too soon. Josie had already gone to bed, thank God. I told Monica she wasn't feeling great. She didn't ask further. Later once, she was upstairs brushing her teeth, going through her routine like nothing was off. I sat alone in the guest room. Door barely closed. The clock read 2:14 a.m. The laptop cast a faint bluish glow across the bedspread. I pulled up the doorbell cam. We'd installed it 2 years ago after a break-in 2 streets over. Monica said she wanted to feel safer. Funny how safety can turn into surveillance. I scrolled through the archives. Tuesday. A dark blue Ford F-150 sat across the street. Engine off. Lights dimmed. Didn't pull into our driveway. Just parked. For almost 40 minutes. I checked the timestamp. 10:01 p.m. I'd already been asleep. The week before. Same truck. Same spot. 2 weeks ago. Again. Each time Monica was away on business. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach, not the kind that comes from panic. The kind that settles when denial starts to rot. I logged into our family phone plan, the kind where you can check Tower Ping's general activity locations. Her number never hit Charlotte. Not once. Asheville. Twice. Once near the Biltmore. Once near a small hiking trail. Neither place had anything to do with strategy consulting. I closed the tabs. Rubbed my face with both hands. Then I remembered something. That old phone. The one she said had glitched out last year. She kept it in the drawer downstairs, refused to throw it out, said she might recover pictures from Josie's 5th-grade recital someday. I went downstairs, careful not to creak the last step. The house felt frozen. Even the fridge hum seemed hesitant. In the drawer under old batteries and expired coupons, I found it. A scuffed-up iPhone screen cracked in the corner. Still had charge. I pressed the side button. It lit up. Lock screen. I tried a few guesses. Josie's birthday. Our wedding date. Nope. Then Monica's brother. She always used his numbers. It unlocked. There it was. Messages. Not many, but enough. A thread pinned to the top. No name. Just the letter D and a red heart. I clicked in. The most recent text, he signed it. The policy's live. I just need the right night. I stared, then read it again. My chest felt hollow. Not just because of what it said, but because of how casually it was written. Another message a few days older. It's better if he doesn't suspect. Keep smiling. Make the soup. Act tired too. And then, once it's done, I'll take care of the girl. She'll be better off. I didn't blink. Didn't breathe for a few seconds. My thumb hovered over the screen. More messages from Monica. He still eats at 6. Falls asleep by 9. I've started small doses. No symptoms yet. I swallowed. Next trip I'll slip it in. Wait 20 minutes. Should look like his heart gave out. No emotion. Just planning. Just scheduling my last breath like a client call. I felt heat rise to my face. But not rage. Clarity. It was like something inside me, a fog that had hung there for months, was finally lifting. There was a voice message. New, unplayed. I hesitated, looked at the door. Still shut. I clicked play. Her voice. Low. Whispery. Once he drinks it, I'll wait 20 minutes. It'll look natural. He's been tired lately anyway. People will think it was the stress. And after, we can finally breathe. I paused the message halfway. The phone slipped slightly in my hand. Not because I was shaking, but because everything in me had gone still. Like my body refused to move until my brain caught up. That wasn't a plan. That was a death sentence. Written with my name. She wanted my life to look like an accident. No public scene, no bruises. Just silence. A neat ending. I stared at the screen, then slowly back eye sat there. For I don't know how long. The hum of the laptop, the fridge, even the wind outside all sounded farther. Josie was still asleep. I could hear her soft breathing through the cracked wall. That calmed me. I opened the drawer next to the desk. Pulled out my old external hard drive. The kind with the little blue light that blinks like a pulse. I plugged it in. The phone in my hand was still warm. Still unlocked. I selected the thread. Clicked export. Then opened my email. Attached the voice recording. Sent it to an account Monica didn't know I had. One copy wasn't enough. I transferred every file. The texts, the timestamps, the clip of her voice saying the words. My fingers moved fast, but my breath stayed slow. A few years ago, I would have shouted, confronted her, demanded answers. Now I just saved evidence. Quietly, completely. Like I'd already accepted that there'd never be an answer I could believe. When the files finished uploading, I sat back. The blue light on the drive blinked, like a heartbeat. I thought of the anniversary she skipped last year. The dinner she never came home for. The day she forgot Josie's birthday. Every one of those moments had a shadow behind it. A lie I hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to. I closed the laptop, tucked the hard drive into the pocket of my winter coat hanging by the back door. Then I turned off the light. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie down. I just sat there in the guest room listening to the night move outside. Owls, leaves, wind through old gutters. But the scariest sound was silence. The kind that made you wonder what else was waiting. She wasn't just cheating, she was preparing for my funeral. Would you dig deeper, or protect what's left of your PSD out of the app? No more messages. Nothing else recent. But it was enough. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark feet on the hardwood floor, laptop still humming faintly on the guest bed behind me. Outside, the wind had settled. Inside, everything else had just started to move. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I picked up my phone and hit the contact I hadn't used in years. Reed, I said, barely above a whisper. I think Monica's trying to kill me. There was silence on the other end. Then a short inhale. I'm listening, he said. I hadn't heard his voice since Josie was 6. The last time was at his wedding. But Reed wasn't the kind of man who asked questions before acting. Not when it was life or death, and he knew without me explaining this was the second one. The last time I ignored my gut, it cost 2 lives in Afghanistan. That memory, it's the reason I made the call. The reason I didn't second guess. Meet me in person, he said. Sunrise. Diner off I-26 near Asheville. You remember the one? I do. By the time morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds, I had already packed a drive with the files. Josie was slipping cereal into her backpack. She always liked dry cereal, never milk, and gave me that look she used to give when I left for long trips. Except this time I wasn't leaving for work. You'll be okay, she asked quietly. I promise. I hugged her longer than usual. She didn't pull away. When the school bus pulled out of sight, I stood alone on the porch. The sun hit the back of my neck, warm and indifferent. The world was still spinning. But mine had tilted overnight. The diner hadn't changed. Same chipped mugs. Same pale yellow booths. The kind of place that made you feel like nothing bad ever happened unless you knew where to look. Reed was already there when I walked in. He looked older, a little grayer around the temples. But his eyes still sharp, still scanning every window, every plate, every move. I slid the USB across the table without a word. He plugged it into a small tablet. Scrolled. Didn't blink. Then he looked up. You're sitting on a time bomb. I know. He kept scrolling. His thumb paused over the text from Monica. She really said this. I nodded. Reed leaned back. You still got your old drive with backups. I tapped the messenger bag beside me. He smiled slightly. You never did trust the cloud. By the time the waitress brought the check, Reed had already made 2 calls. One was to a man named Ellis. I didn't ask. The other was to the sheriff. Sheriff Leland Ward didn't waste time. By 3 p.m. we were in the back of his station. Files spread across a whiteboard. My laptop plugged into the wall. Reed pacing slowly, arms crossed. Legally, the sheriff said we can't arrest her on intention, but if she acts on it, Reed asked. The sheriff nodded. Then it becomes attempted. And if we have proof, he didn't finish the sentence. I know a place, I said. They both looked at me. The lakehouse, up in the Highlands. Monica's favorite spot. She used to say it was where life felt quiet. We'll wire it, Reed said. Mix. Cameras. Dead zones covered. The sheriff rubbed his chin. You'll have to play along. I nodded. You okay with that, he asked. I paused. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said. I'm doing this because my daughter deserves a father who lives. That night I stood by the window. The lake house was just as I remembered. Wood creaked under my steps. The air smelled like pine and old stories. Outside wind brushed over the still water, carrying the first chill of October. Leaves swirled gently off the porch railing, caught in a quiet dance. Inside, everything was ready. 2 cameras hidden in the hallway vents, one beneath the kitchen shelf right above where Monica liked to pour her wine. Microphone in the lamp by the bed. Reed had done his work well. All that was left was to play my part. I called her around 6:20 p.m. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, I said, my voice soft. Got the place warmed up. She didn't ask why I sounded off. She didn't ask if Josie was coming. Instead, she said, I'll leave in 20. Just us, just us. She laughed lightly. Like old times. I stared at the dark glass of the lake outside. Yeah, like old times. The next morning I drove Josie to my sister's in Virginia. 6 hours in the car. She talked about school, a book she was reading, how Mrs. Nolan always wore 2 different shoes and didn't notice. I listened. I nodded. When we pulled into the driveway, she reached over and held my hand. You'll be okay, I looked at her and lied. I promise. By the time I got back to the lake house, the sun was setting. I showered. Put on the old flannel shirt Monica once bought me for Christmas. Let the fireplace flicker quietly in the corner. Everything felt suspended. At 8:07 p.m. headlights crawled down the gravel road. She stepped out wearing deep burgundy. Heels. Hair curled just the way she used to when we first dated. In her hand, a bottle of wine. Cabernet, she said, holding it up like a peace offering. Your favorite. She kissed my cheek. I flinched barely, but she didn't notice. Inside, she poured 2 glasses. I sat at the table. She handed one to me, smiled. And I let her. Have you ever had to fake a smile long enough? Just to catch the moment, someone stops pretending. To us, Monica said, lifting her glass with a smile too slow to be real. I let mine hover midair. To truth, I replied. And I watched her drink. The fire crackled behind us. Its light flickered against the dark wood walls of the lake house. A bottle of red wine rested between us, open breathing. 2 glasses sat nearby. One of them untouched. Mine. Monica curled her legs up on the couch, her socked feet tucked under her as if this were just another cozy Friday night getaway. Her voice was soft, almost musical. Feels good to be out here again, like old times. She reached for the bottle and poured herself another half glass, then looked at me, eyes steady, almost too steady. You haven't said much since we got here. Everything okay? I forced a half smile. Just tired. Work's been heavy. She leaned in, her fingers brushing my arm. Well, maybe this weekend will be exactly what we need. I let my eyes drift to the windows. Fog was rolling across the surface of Lake Watauga. Soft, slow. Like a curtain being drawn over the night. In the distance, a loon called once, long, low, mournful. I looked back at Monica. She'd already sent the first message. I could feel it. I shifted on the couch. My hand brushed the untouched glass beside me, knocking it slightly. It wobbled. She didn't flinch. Didn't reach to save it. That was how I knew. She didn't care if I drank it or not anymore. Because she believed she'd already won. The fire crackled again, louder this time. The wind tapped the windows with cold fingers. She reached for her phone casually. I caught the reflection of the screen in her wine glass. A text short. 1 line. Then she slipped the phone back into her pocket. I stood up slowly. Bathroom, I said. Sure, she replied, leaning back, eyes still on her glass. In the hallway mirror, I saw myself, pale, tense, the outline of the mic wire tucked behind my collar. I adjusted it, breathing slow. This was the part that counted. The performance. I splashed a little water on my face. Not too much. Just enough to look clammy under the firelight. Then I returned. The couch welcomed me like a trap that hadn't quite sprung. Monica watched as I took the glass. Lifted it. Let it slip, spilled a bit on my shirt. She laughed lightly. Garrett, smooth as ever. I smiled back. Guess I should lie down for a bit. I let my body sink into the cushions. My eyelids fluttered half open, then closed. My chest rose and fell with calculated rhythm. Deep. Slow. I heard her stand. Her feet patted softly across the rug. Another message sent. Out by the trees parked behind the old woodshed, Derek would be waiting. And Reed. He and Sheriff Ward were just down the road. Listening. Monica stepped over me, paused. I could smell her perfume, vanilla and something sharper underneath. She leaned close. Her fingers brushed my cheek. I'll make it quick, she whispered. Then she was gone. The dock was flooded with light. Flashlights. Body cams. The sheriff's cruiser headlights cutting through the fog. I stood there dripping lake mist, my shirt clinging to my back. My heart pounding, but not from fear. From relief and something colder. Justice. Reed gave me a nod from the sidearms crossed. Sheriff Ward finished reading Monica her rights as an officer cuffed Derek, who still had mud on his knees. They both looked smaller now. No more whispering, no more shadows, just the truth, out in the open. I walked over slowly. My boots squished against the wetwood step by step. Monica turned as I approached. Her hair was falling out of its perfect style, her lip gloss smeared. But her eyes, they were clear. Too clear. I didn't think you'd actually do it, she said softly. Neither did you, I replied. A pause. Then she laughed. Just once. Sharp. Hollow. You were never supposed to matter this much, Garrett. Not like this. I stared at her, and yet you wrote out the policy in my name. Planned it all. That's not indifference. That's calculation. Another pause. She stepped slightly forward, the cuffs clinking behind her back. Then she whispered the one thing I never expected. I loved you. 3 words, not desperate, not emotional, just like a fact. I blinked. Was it true or just another manipulation? But it didn't matter anymore. The lights were still on. The mics had caught everything. And the woman who once kissed my forehead goodnight was now being escorted into a cruiser in zip-tied wrists. Was I setting her up, or saving myself? Tell me what you see in that moment. Dad, is she going to prison? Josie asked it while staring down at the grilled cheese on her plate, her voice soft but unwavering. Her legs were tucked under her, a blanket draped over her lap, even though it was warm inside. I sat across from her, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched in 10 minutes. I paused. Yes, baby. She is. The words sat heavy in the room. They didn't echo, they just landed. Like stones on wet earth. Final. Real. The television was off. The room quiet. Outside, a car passed, tires crunching gravel. Inside, the scent of butter and burnt edges lingered. Josie hadn't taken a bite. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She almost took you from me, she said, her eyes not leaving her plate. That's not what moms do. I wanted to say something, anything to soften the edges. But I remembered what Sheriff Ward told me outside the courthouse. Your daughter's old enough to hear the truth, the real one. And truth was all we had left now. She didn't ask any more questions over dinner. She just stood up quietly, rinsed her plate, and placed it in the dishwasher like we were any normal family on a regular school night. Except the silence said otherwise. It wasn't angry silence. It was processing silence. The kind that takes root when a kid has had to grow up too fast. Later that night, I sat at the dining table alone, sifting through the folders Sheriff Ward handed me that morning. Printouts of insurance policies, one with my name. Another dated 6 months ago with Josie's, signed by Monica. Beneficiary Derek Lanham. That name still made my stomach turn. My phone buzzed once. It was a text from Candace, Monica's cousin, the one I never liked much, but who always showed up around crisis time. They called me in. I told them everything. An hour later, Sheriff Ward called to confirm it. Candace had cracked. She turned over receipts from pharmacy pickups. And 2 voice memos. Monica had sent her, one rehearsing the dosage, one laughing about how quiet the lake was that time of year. Enough to seal the case. The prosecutor's office moved quickly. No bail. Full charges. Attempted homicide. Insurance fraud. Conspiracy. Still, that wasn't what broke me. It was when Josie came into the living room, holding the sheriff's folder in her hands. She sat beside me and whispered, "Can I ask you something hard?" I nodded, bracing. "Did you ever suspect her? Like, really suspect her?" Before I said anything, I thought about that morning, the one after our anniversary last year, when Monica came home late with lipstick on her collar and said it was just a client dinner. I remembered brushing it off. I remembered telling myself, we all forget anniversaries sometimes. I looked Josie in the eye and said yes. But I was scared of what it meant if I was right. She didn't nod. She didn't hug me. She just leaned her head on my shoulder. And for the first time in weeks, we both closed our eyes, not because we were tired, but because we finally didn't have to keep watch. The Boone County Courthouse was colder than I remembered. Not the air, the walls. The silence between hearings. The way every cough or shoe scuff echoed down those marble hallways. They held Monica in custody on the lower level, but I wasn't allowed to see her. Not that I planned to. I was there for Josie. She'd agreed to speak with the district attorney in private, with the judge and a counselor present. No jury. No pressure. Just the truth. I sat outside the chamber, fingers wrapped around a paper cup of bitter coffee. Through the glass, I could just see the edge of Josie's braid as she sat beside the court-appointed child advocate. I remembered her birth. 7 pounds 9 ounces. The way Monica had cried and said, "She looks just like you." That was the last time I ever believed her without hesitation. The DA stepped out an hour later. "She did well," she said softly. "Braver than most adults we've seen." I nodded, swallowing the heat rising in my throat. "She asked to see you," the woman added. When I walked into the room, Josie was standing by the window. She turned and gave me a small smile. "I told them the truth," she said. "I know you did." She looked older somehow. Like she'd added 3 years in 3 weeks. Her voice didn't tremble. Her hands didn't fidget. "I'm not scared of her anymore," she added. "Even if she looks at me like I betrayed her." I stepped closer and said what I hadn't been able to before. "You didn't betray anyone. You saved me." She nodded once. "Then we're even." The next day in court, the courtroom was full. Not packed, but full enough that every shuffle, every chair scrape felt amplified. Monica sat beside her attorney. Hair-pinned blouse crisp. No shackles on her ankles today, but still cuffed at the wrists. She didn't look at me. Didn't scan the room for Josie either. The prosecutor stood and clicked the remote. A speaker near the judge's bench hissed softly. Then came the voice. Monica's voice. Flat. Chilling. Crush the Ambien. Stir it in. He won't wake up. Another click. Another file. If he does wake, just say he's had too much wine. Tell him he was snoring on the couch. Smile. Always smile. I stared straight ahead. I didn't flinch. Not even when people in the gallery turned to glance at me. Reed sat behind me. Sheriff Ward too. And somewhere outside these walls, Derek's lawyer was drafting his own plea. When the audio ended, the room stayed silent. No gasps. No murmurs. Just silence. The judge leaned forward. "We'll break for closing statements at noon." Gavels don't always bang. Sometimes they just decide. I stood legs stiff. Heart slower than it should have been, and I walked out. Not to escape, not to cry, but because I'd heard all I needed to. My daughter knew the truth. So did the court. And soon, the sentence would be read. Outside the courthouse, the reporters were waiting. They always were. One woman from the local news tried to stop me. "Mr. Keene, how does it feel knowing your wife planned?" I kept walking. Flashes popped. Questions flew. But they were just noise now. In front of me, standing just past the courthouse steps, was Josie. Backpack on. Hair in a loose braid. Hands in the pockets of her denim jacket. She didn't wave. She just looked at me. And I understood. She was watching to see if I'd still be the same dad. If I'd still be her anchor even after everything. I walked up slowly. She looked up at me and said, "Let's go home." That was it. Not a movie ending. Not a dramatic speech. Just a quiet request. From the only person who mattered. We walked to the truck together. The wind picked up. Leaves scattered across the sidewalk. And behind us, a dozen voices shouted questions we'd never answer. "Do you think forgiveness has a place here, or are there lines you never cross, not even for love?" "Will we be okay now?" Josie asked. Her voice was softer these days. Not smaller, just lighter. We were standing by the back window of our new place, a small 2-bedroom just outside Asheville. The view stretched into the Blue Ridge, still wearing its winter bones, but the early spring air carried birdsong and the promise of green. I smiled. "We already are." It wasn't a line. I meant it. The house still smelled like fresh paint and pine wood. We hadn't unpacked everything, but the windows were open, the coffee was brewing, and there was something new in Josie's laugh that I hadn't heard in months. She had started wearing mismatched socks again. Started humming under her breath while making toast. It sounds like nothing, but to me it meant everything. Outside, a squirrel ran across the wooden fence. Inside, our lives had quieted. Reed helped us move in a week after the sentencing. Monica got 30 years, no parole. The judge called her actions calculated and predatory. I didn't attend the final hearing. I didn't need to. What mattered most was the custody ruling. Full. Uncontested. Josie had looked at the guardian ad litem and said, "My mom tried to take him from me. I want to stay with my dad." The room went still when she said it. But no one argued. Reed stayed a few extra days to help us settle in. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but one night after we'd finished putting together Josie's bookshelf, he looked at me over his beer and said, "The second half of your life doesn't start until you let the first one burn." At the time, I just nodded. But now, sitting on our new porch in the mornings, hearing Josie yell goal across the backyard as she kicked a soccer ball against the fence, I finally understood what he meant. We used part of the recovered money, about $100,000 in total. Half of it went into a trust for Josie's future. The other half, that went into Iron Ridge. It was Reed's idea, but mine to build. A survival and readiness program for veterans and at-risk teens. A place to learn not just how to live through something hard, but how to live after it. The community showed up in ways I hadn't expected. Neighbors brought tools. A retired carpenter offered to help with framing the bunkhouse. A local grocer offered to sponsor weekend meal packs for the teens. Word spread fast. When the local paper sent a young journalist to interview me, she asked, "What would you say to other parents?" I didn't hesitate. Trust your instincts. And never ignore a child's fear. Kids see everything, especially the things we try to hide. She jotted it down, then looked up and said, "That might help someone." I hoped it would. Josie joined the local soccer league not long after we moved in. At first, she barely touched the ball. Hung back. Watched. But by the second week, something shifted. She started running harder, calling for passes, smiling when she missed because she was finally playing like it mattered. I sat in a fold-out chair on the sidelines every Saturday morning, coffee in hand, breath fogging in the mountain air. And I watched her become a girl again. Not a girl carrying secrets. Not a girl holding her breath. Just Josie. She made a friend named Talia, loud, kind, always eating granola bars. They talked about music and boys and their weird science teacher. The ordinary things I used to take for granted. One afternoon after practice, Josie climbed into the truck, tossed her cleats in the back, and said, "You can call me Ja again if you want." Like you used to. I looked over at her. She was grinning, hair wild from the wind. Eyes brighter than I'd seen in over a year. All right, Jay, I said. But only if you still call me old man. She laughed so hard, she snorted. And that sound, that big, ugly, beautiful snort, was the best thing I'd heard all week. The opening day of Iron Ridge arrived on a crisp Saturday morning in April. Reed was already at the lot by sunrise, hammering the final sign into place. I brought the folding chairs and coffee. Josie brought the ribbon. We didn't need a crowd, but they came anyway. Families. Veterans. Teens. A few neighbors who remembered seeing the sheriff's car outside our old place last year but never asked questions. We didn't give them drama, we gave them something better. A clean gravel path led from the small field office to a clearing with benches and a fire pit. Beyond that, the first bunkhouse painted forest green to blend into the trees. I stood under a wide white banner that read, Iron Ridge, stay Reedy. Stay human. Reed said a few words. Short, direct. Like always. Then it was my turn. I looked out over the people, the young, the tired, the ones who had that same tightness behind their smiles that I used to carry. And I said, this isn't about paranoia, it's about preparation. Not for a war, but for life. Because survival doesn't just mean making it through. It means being able to live after. Josie walked up beside me with the scissors. Ready, Dad, I nodded. We cut the ribbon together. After the ribbon fluttered to the ground, people clapped. Nothing loud. Just a gentle wave of hands meeting, enough to say we see you. Enough to say you're not alone anymore. Josie leaned into my side, her hand still holding part of the ribbon. She whispered, I'm proud you're my dad. It landed deeper than anything I'd heard in the courtroom. Deeper than any article or thank you note or handshake. Because this wasn't about being right, or even safe. It was about being real again. Later that night, after the crowd had gone and the sun had tucked itself behind the mountains, we sat on the cabin steps overlooking the valley, 2 mugs of hot cocoa between us. The stars slowly blinking awake. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect. There would still be therapy. Memories. Moments when silence might feel heavier than comfort. But it would be ours. And it would be honest. And that more than safety, more than justice, was the beginning of everything new. Tag someone who needs to hear this. Surviving isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you'll ever do. That evening on the cabin steps with Josie leaning into me and stars above us, I realized this wasn't the end of something broken. It was the beginning of something real. Sometimes the hardest truths open the door to peace. And when a child is brave enough to speak up, it's not just survival they're asking for, it's a future. A chance to be safe, to be seen, and to be loved without fear. In this life, protection isn't just about shields and locks, it's about listening when it matters most. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace or protecting what truly matters?